Blog Talk Radio.
923, I'll give you a corrected address, but we do have a fire in a one-story ordinary. Looks like it's about 40 by 120 to 125. We'll get to traffic control. Squad 5, Squad 5. And go to 273-273. And go Battalion 18 Battalion. Go to 273-273.
Hey, good evening, everybody. This is Tom Merrill, and I'd like to welcome you to another installment of the Professional Volunteer Fire Department, sponsored by Fire Engineering. I'm so glad to have you here with me tonight. Today is Tuesday, January 10th, and yes, it's 2017 already. I cannot believe we're already into the year 2017, and I certainly hope that the past year, that 2016 was a good year for you and your fire department and your fellow firefighters. And I want to thank everyone that I got to meet over the last year, talking about all the good things being done in your department and sharing some concerns about things we could all do better and helping to deliver the message, the main theme of the show, that being a professional firefighter has nothing to do at all with earning a paycheck. It's all about how we approach the job and how we train and how we take care of our customers and how we take care of our fellow firefighters. So thank you to everybody that helps spread that message and helps work to make their department the best and most professional department it possibly can be. And so many great things happened in 2016. Yes, there certainly was tragedies as well, but I thought I'd start off with interesting piece that did come across the wire recently about, firefighters are just great people all across this land, all across the world, right? And there's been so many acts of kindness that have been captured by the media. They always capture us when we're doing something wrong also, but there were several heartwarming stories over the past year, and came across this interesting piece highlighting the top 5 acts of firefighter kindness for the past year, and I just thought I'd share them with you because, again, it highlights how caring and compassionate firefighters are. And, for example, in Port Arthur, Texas, a group of firefighters there took it upon themselves to build a specialized fire playhouse for a little 6-year-old boy who had spina bifida. And he couldn't use his legs, couldn't use his arms, and he's got to move in a wheelchair, and he often came to the Port Arthur Firehouse. So the firefighters there got together and built him a little specialized firehouse. This little boy with spina bifida could take advantage of that and maybe make his day just a little bit better. And in Phoenix, Arizona, a poor 9-year-old girl was hit in the face by some derelict who was throwing rocks at passing cars. And she had some pretty serious injuries. So a group of firefighters in Phoenix decided to get together and start a GoFundMe page to help pay for her medical and living expenses because she needed some pretty serious surgery. And they raised a bunch of money to help her out. And on the other side of the country, in Hall County, Georgia, this poor woman had an auto accident where her car crashed into a tree, and in the vehicle with her was her 2-year-old daughter. And she was autistic, and was very scared, and it was a very, concerning to her that her mom was hurt and the car was damaged, and the firefighters there comforted her by singing Wheels on the Bus to her as they worked to take care of her mother and also this 2-year-old girl and get them to the hospital, and they were singing Wheels on the Bus to comfort her and the mother. And up in Michigan, just outside Detroit, firefighters heard about an 18-year-old who was suffering from muscular dystrophy, and it was hard for the family to pay his electric bill. And this poor person needed the electricity for his ventilator. And the firefighters got together and helped raise money to help pay this family's electric bill to keep this 18-year-old on the ventilator, which he so desperately needed to live. And then over in California, I'm sure many of you remember seeing this, there was a crew returning to the fire station, and they saw an elderly homeless man who was walking down the street, and the crew pulled over, and one of the firefighters on that crew took off his shoes and gave them to this homeless person who had no shoes. And the captain actually even helped put the shoes on this poor homeless person. Just 5 simple acts of kindness out of the many, 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 many that firefighters exhibited in the year 2016. And you know what? It spans paid, it spans volunteer. It has nothing to do with that. It's just the fact that firefighters, paid and volunteer, are some of the greatest people you would ever want to meet. And these few examples illustrate, and there's many more examples of that. And as we enter 2017, I'm sure that many of you are making goals, and that's a good thing. Make goals with your fire department as well. And how about a health and safety goal? How about making 2017 a year that you rededicate yourself to being a healthy firefighter? Rededicate yourself to taking the steps that are necessary, not even for yourself, but also for your department, and take the steps necessary to help limit our the cancer epidemic that is ravaging the ranks of the fire service. Maybe we could take some steps in our firehouses to help reduce the risk of cancer to all of us. Maybe we can look at what's needed to be heart healthy with our food decisions, our nutrition decisions, and maybe we can get together with other firefighters and rededicate ourselves to getting into a workout routine. And it doesn't have to be anything too strenuous. Take small steps to start. Walk with other firefighters. Enter some runs with some other firefighters. It's fun to do it together as a team. We do so many things together as firefighters, and we share advice with each other all the time. Let's share some healthy advice with each other and work together to make ourselves better, stronger, heart healthier, and also look out for those who maybe are having a little trouble or struggling. And remember, the old days of looking the other way and saying we have to deal with the things we see. We're firefighters. We just bury our head in the sand and pretend it doesn't affect us. Oh, it does affect us. And we're noticing many behavioral issues and challenges facing first responders, and there's a lot of resources out there to help. And one of the best resources is you, by being compassionate, by being understanding, and being a brother. And remember, the word brother has the word her in it. Brother to everybody out there, and stand ready to assist them and get the help they need. The other thing for 2017 that came to my attention is maybe we can make ourselves better leaders. And maybe many of you out there are assuming, as of January 1st, you're assuming an officer role for the first time. Maybe some of you were elected a chief for the first time in your volunteer department. No matter whatever position you're in, even if you've been reelected to a position you've been in, how about making 2017 a year to make yourself better as a leader? All of us from time to time need to take a step back to maybe look in the mirror and ask yourself, how am I doing? We can all acknowledge that no matter what rank we're at, no matter what your tenure, no matter what your age, you can always improve in some way. We talked about that just now. Maybe we can get better physically. Maybe we can get better nutritionally. But you know what? Maybe we can get better as a leader and as a mentor and teach ourselves how to work better with everyone that is given to us in our volunteer department. We can't draft people in our volunteer department. The community sends us people to volunteer. They're not all going to be perfect. They're not all going to be the A team that you might want it to be. Heck, you might not even be on the A team. But you know what? We can learn to work with the people that come to us. There's a position for everybody. We can work with the hand we're dealt. Remember the old saying, it's not the cards you're dealt, it's how you play your hand. Play your hand by making yourself the best leader you possibly can be. I hear it over and over again, and I've continued to hear it a lot this year. Leadership is huge in the volunteer fire service. So make it a goal to maybe pick up a book or attend a class to make yourself a better leader in 2017. Because you know what? If we don't take care of our people, if we don't take care of these people that are coming to us to volunteer and work to understand them and to properly mentor them and teach them and motivate them, we'll have nobody to take care of. So make it a goal, one of your many goals this year, to become a better leader. Hey, here's an idea. How about attending a leadership class at FDIC 2017? FDIC, you continue to hear it said, and I'm here to verify, it is the premier firefighting training event in the world. It's this April 24th to the 29th in Indianapolis. Make it a goal to try and attend it, if at all possible, because I'll tell you what, there will be a lot of leadership classes. As a matter of fact, I signed up for a few leadership classes, and there'll be a lot of other classes. Pretty much anything that floats your boat in the volunteer fire service will be covered somehow, some way at FDIC 2017. Heck, I even have a class. Love to see you in my class, the Professional Volunteer Fire Department, and that's Monday, April 24th. It's a 4-hour class from 1:30 to 5:30 on the 24th of April, and we can talk together about things we can do to make our department a more professional operation. I don't have all the answers. I love going out and teaching and talking about professional departments because every time I do, I learn something new. I add something to my class that I pick up because there's people out there like you that are teaching me some things that can be done to make our operation a little more professional. So again, 2017, work to make yourself a better firefighter, work to make yourself a better leader, and if at all possible, consider attending 2017's FDIC. So welcome to our show. Again, a show that's dedicated to the message and the belief that being a professional has nothing to do with earning that paycheck. It has everything to do with our attitude, our appearance, our competence. And we're going to talk about all the great things on this show that the Volunteer Fire Service does, and we also talk about some of the challenges that we face. If you'd like to call in tonight, our number is 760-454-8852, and we would love to hear from you. And our guest this evening is a former chief and an attorney at law who is going to talk to us about some of the challenges and some of the things we see in the volunteer fire service that continue to get us hung up. Some of the legal issues, some are easily preventable, and others, well, we had no idea that maybe they would even get us in trouble. Sometimes we had no idea that the way we've always been doing things was actually illegal or maybe bordering on it. You know, we have that excuse, but that's how we've always done it. Sometimes that's uttered when it's pointed out that, you know what, that's illegal. In some cases, it is easy to understand that in our volunteer ranks with everything that's competing for our time and everything that we're trying to get done, namely training and going to emergency incidents, and then going back and taking care of our family and earning an actual living to take care of our family, that maybe we don't have time to open up that perceived can of worms to rewrite our bylaws or lobby for changes and, you know, maybe fix what really needs to be fixed because it's okay. We've always done it that way. Well, sometimes that way is great until it happens. So I'm pleased to welcome John Murphy to the show tonight, who is a former deputy chief in the East Side Fire and Rescue Department. He's also a contributor and an author and a blogger for fire engineering. He's on the circuit as a lecturer and as an instructor, including at the National Fire Academy. I believe he's also a physician's assistant. And he's also an attorney. He co-hosts the popular fire engineering blog talk radio show, Fire Service Court. And I'm very pleased to have him here with us tonight. And if you'd like to call in, again, the number 760-454-8852. And, John, I believe I have you with us, and you are on the road lecturing right now, I believe, aren't you?
Yes, I am, Tom. And first I wanted to say thank you very much. It's an honor and a privilege to be on your show. I've heard you speak before. You're an amazing presenter, and I think the message that you have is very important. I think that 80% of our fire service are volunteers, or at least more than 75% anyway. And I admire what volunteers do and the dedication that they have, you know, to their communities. And it does take a lot away from their work or their family, to make sure that the citizens of their communities are safe. So I appreciate this show, and you're exactly right. I think, you're advertising for FDIC, one of the biggest shows in the country for firefighters, and there's a lot of education. And I'm also doing a show or a presentation there, and I'm hate to tell you this, but you and I are on competing.
We're competing? Oh, no.
Yeah, we're on the same day, same hour. But I know that there's going to be a lot of volunteers there. There always are. And, they may want to listen to you on, what they can do to enhance their own volunteer fire department. There's an inordinate amount of volunteers there. So, the legal issues are like, oh, yeah, we'll take care of that when it hits the fan. So my class is all about, preventing legal fire. So I'm looking forward to being there with you and with 32,000 brother and sister firefighters either attending or making a presentation.
Excellent. Yeah, and I know I had the opportunity to sit in your class in Dallas back in June, and you covered a lot of good material in a very short time. And I took so many notes at that time that I was like, because you opened my eyes to a lot of things I didn't even think of, and that's what gave me the idea to get you on the show. To hopefully there's some things we can talk about tonight and open some people's eyes and get some people thinking back in their volunteer departments about some steps they can take to help. And I love that term, prevent legal fires. And before we get into that, if you wouldn't mind, just take a minute here. Tell us a little bit about your fire service history, how you became a firefighter and how you made the connection with becoming an attorney. Maybe you became an attorney first. I don't even know. And then I believe you are a physician's assistant also, aren't you, or work in the medical field as well? You're a man of all trades.
Well, I'm a man that's easily bored. I was teaching a class yesterday in Frisco. I was at the Texas A&M fire extension program up there. They had a 2.5-day conference, and I was kind of, joking with the class that I have more letters after my last name that are in my last name. So it's
wow.
So lots of letters back there. So it's been
schooling.
Quite an experience. A lot of schooling, yeah. So. I grew up in upstate New York. I grew up in Bainbridge, New York, which is just north of Binghamton. Went to high school in Bainbridge. They call it Bainbridge Guilford High School. It was a combined school. Now it's combined with another community, small town of 5,000 people, agricultural community. And there was a lot of the men, especially in the village, were volunteer firefighters, and so right in our backyard we had Board and Chemical Company, and they had the fire whistle on the roof, and every time there was a fire or a squad call, a siren would blow, and so we knew all the activity that was going on in the community, and then the hills would come alive with blue lights from the volunteers coming down to the main station in downtown Bainbridge, and then hear the sirens taking off. So, I've always been exposed to that sort of environment, although my father was not a volunteer, but my best friend's dad was on a rescue squad, and I always admired, that activity, especially in our village, because that was the only step between, people surviving, a catastrophic incident. And so I really admired those, that sort of group of people. But I really wasn't interested in being a firefighter. I was on the college track. I was going to go to college to be a teacher, and so I was, kind of moving in that direction. And then I went to college in Pennsylvania, and then I did pretty good, and then kind of lost interest, got terminated. Actually, it's the only place I've ever been fired from was college, which is kind of funny.
Oh, wow.
But yeah, but I joined the Navy, and so I went into the Navy as a hospital corpsman, and did a tour in Vietnam with the Marine Corps, and came out, and then was working in the hospital in Olympia, Washington, and I was getting ready to go back to school, finish off my educational degree, and this young man comes in with kidney stones, and I was working in the emergency room at the time. He said, "Hey, they're starting this paramedic fire program in our county, and it seems like you'd be qualified based on my medical experience." I said, "Well, maybe I'll give it a shot." And so I applied, got hired, and after 32 years of being in the fire service, I retired in 2007. So it was, starting out as a paramedic firefighter and ended up retiring in a deputy fire chief it was quite a road trip for me. Most of the departments I worked in were combination departments. So, we had about half volunteer, half career people. There was only one department I worked in that was all career people, which was down in close to Tacoma, Washington. But my last assignment, I guess, or my last job was at East Side Fire and Rescue in Issaquah, Washington, and that was a combination department. It was predominantly volunteer when I got there. My job when I got hired was to, kind of bring more career people on because of the service that was required, and our volunteers were all professionals. They worked at Boeing, they worked at Microsoft, they're airline pilots, doctors. And so as our call volume increased, their availability became less and less. And so, over the time that I was there, we ended up going from 3 stations, 28 firefighters and about 150 volunteers, to where we're at 16 stations with 160 career people, and we still have 100 volunteers, which are fairly active in the organization. And one of the things we found is that in that sort of environment, we ended up being a training ground for volunteer firefighters, that we either hire them in our organization or they get hired in other organizations around the Puget Sound area or the state of Washington. So it's been quite an enjoyable experience for me. And then one of my assignments was as a training officer, so I got to spend a lot of time with new recruit volunteers coming into our organization, and it was very satisfying seeing, these young men and women, be successful as volunteers. And then, some of them had other interests, other education, and so they stayed in our organization for a period of time, and then their job maybe moved them to a different community where we hope they participated in their volunteer program in the community that they ended up in. So it's been quite an experience in the fire service.
It's interesting. You mentioned how you were originally from Bainbridge, New York, and it makes me think of, in my fire service travels, how many from the northeastern area, New York especially, and boy, I think our biggest export is people, and I wonder if it has anything to do with, I meant to say this earlier, let's see, when I came home from work, I work at the fire alarm office, and the other night I came home at midnight, and it was 10 degrees out, and snow was blowing, the streets were icy, and Thursday it's going to be 62 degrees here. I wonder if that has anything to do with chasing people out of here. So,
well,
crazy
I grew up
weather.
As a kid, as a kid, we always, out where I live, if there's a hint of snow, the schools all closed down. And so when I grew up as a kid, if you weren't up to your eyeballs in snow, you were going to school. And it had no snow days, back in those days. So it was quite a change in culture.
We make it through. It takes a lot our airport is known for never closing because we know how to deal with a little bit of snow.
Yeah.
But another thing, too, you mentioned, too, and a good topic for another show is the combination volunteer departments, which there's a lot of in this country. And so you've certainly been exposed to the volunteer fire service, both in your work and I'm sure also on the law side. So I was going to get into first of all, how did you end up deciding? I kind of like this law thing. I might want to get. You've done the corpsman, and thank you for your service, by the way. I didn't know that about you, and I appreciate your service. And my father was a proud World War II naval veteran, so I'm very partial to the Navy. And although my grandfather was a World War I Army veteran, I used to go back and forth about that all the time. But anyway, thank you for your service. And so I see how you got into the paramedic thing, especially back in that era when paramedicine was coming almost as a result of the Vietnam War and the medic work being done over there. So how did you end up getting into the law field? Just something that interested you?
Well, it didn't until I was thinking about what I was going to do when I retired. So when after I got out of the Navy and joined the fire service, I ended up going back to school for the physician's assistant program. So I ended up moving from Washington to Salt Lake City for 6 months, and then to Boulder, Colorado to do an internship, and then moved back to Washington after a year. And then I rejoined the fire department as a paramedic firefighter. And so I worked sort of dual position. So as a firefighter paramedic, I was working a 24, 48-hour shift, and then on my days off, I'd be a physician's assistant in an emergency room in Olympia, Washington. And so I did that for a few years, and then did it part-time. And so I kind of ran those parallel careers. So every time I moved to a different organization, I kept my physician's assistant license in Washington, and then worked in either the hospital or a clinic or those sorts of things. Then I took about 10 years off towards the end of my fire career, and I was thinking, what can I do to continue my association with the fire service? Because I think for me that was a major portion of my personal identity was of being affiliated with the fire service and being in uniform. So, I've joined the Navy in 1969, and I've been in uniform for over 40 years, which is I liked it. It was it's an excellent career for me, and so I was thinking, what can I do to continue my affiliation with the fire department, and do something that would improve some part of the service with the community or our legal system or whatever. So I was thinking, I have a master's in education, and so should I go get a PhD? And I said, what am I going to do with a PhD? I don't want to dissuade anybody who's going to get their doctorate in whatever discipline they are, but for me that just wasn't going to fly. So I dealt with a lot of attorneys during my tenure with the fire service, and most attorneys, I'm going to insult attorneys here for sure, is they don't know a thing about the fire service. They don't know anything about the culture. They don't know our language. They don't know, what we do. And so when I, go to some depositions or there's a records request, these guys would come in or gals would come in. They don't have a clue of what's going on. I thought, maybe I can go to law school and then provide that sort of added resource and expertise.
So you saw a niche there. You identified a niche.
Yeah, after I retired. So I go to night school. Seattle University had an evening program, and so I worked days as the deputy chief in administration, ran a whole bunch of divisions, and then went to night school. And after 4 hard years, and let me tell you, if you're interested in going to law school, it's very, very difficult, but doable, because I did it. And I'm not the brightest bulb in the box, but I work hard. And so the hard work paid off, and took the bar exam, passed, and then I continued to work for the fire department because I wasn't going to retire for another 4 or 5 years. And so I did all of the labor negotiations, dealt with outside problems like we'd run over people's fences or bicycles or mailboxes or wreck equipment and that sort of stuff. So I was the legal liaison in our organization, and I had a small part-time practice as well. And then when I retired, I got more full-time into the law practice. And so, it became more of, I do a lot of expert witness work, litigation support for fire departments and fire and attorneys, who again are these, mostly litigators. They litigate a lot of different cases. The fire department cases are unusual, first of all, and second of all, they're very complex, again, because of the nature of the work that we perform. And so I do that, and then I have a small practice, so I do family law, and I do some contractual work and those sorts of things. And I do, like you said earlier, I do a lot of writing and work with fire engineering. And I'm on the national circuit. Like yesterday, I said, I'm down in Frisco, Texas, doing a class for those guys on fire legal issues, FDIC, one of the New Orleans fire chiefs, and other places. So it's been sort of a labor of love. And I always tell my wife, it's just like firefighting. It's problem solving for people, but you're not all hot and smoky at the end of the event. So, but I always miss that too. So I go to my station and I inhale, off the apparatus floor, all the smells of the bunker clothing and the diesel and, all of that sort of stuff. So I do miss being out there on the street.
Yeah. Now, I don't know if this would be too broad of a question to ask, but so with your experience in the fire service, are you seeing a trend at all, or are you seeing some common denominators on things that we're tripping ourselves up on that, hey, in 2017 we really got to have our ship in order with this specific item or a couple specific items? Is that too broad of a question to ask, or does something stand out that you're seeing or that you've noticed over the last few years that you've been dealing with that, we got to get the word out, people, that this is something we need to straighten up in our volunteer firehouses?
Right. I think that's an excellent question, and it's not actually too broad. If you read our fire journals, or you look at the blog sites on Facebook, or if you're a tweeter fan or those sorts of things, I think our biggest problem are people. And so in my lecture, I always talk about people are your biggest asset because you got to have them to do the job, but they become your biggest liability. And so if you take a look at the litigation that affects the fire service across the country, it's usually litigation amongst firefighters against the departments for discrimination, hostile work environment, discrimination against people of color or gender, and very little litigation goes towards fires. So if you burn somebody's house down, or you don't put the fire out in time, or people die from cardiac arrest or motor vehicle accident, and you do the very best you can, people generally don't sue the fire departments for that sort of stuff, but they do sue us for, like I said, violation of the Civil Rights Title VII with harassment, discrimination, the bullying, and that sort of stuff. And then sort of the second level, which affects like almost everybody, is social media. And so we've had a number of terminations when firefighters, both volunteer and career, get on their social media sites and they either post a call that they've been on, or they make some crazy comment about, the various political things that are going on in our country today, and identify themselves as a firefighter. And so, if the department has a policy, then, there's a number of firefighters that are going, getting terminated as a result of sort of miscues on their social media sites.
Yeah, it seems like a day doesn't go by that you don't see that.
Yeah.
I was going to say, go ahead, I'm sorry.
No, people who have been in the department for a long period of time kind of make these social miscues or faux pas, or however you want to, screw ups or whatever, and on their social media sites, and all of a sudden they're kind of in a jam with their organization. It doesn't reflect well in the organization, doesn't reflect their policies, and it's so, egregious or outlandish conduct, the way they conduct themselves on these sort of social media sites. The department just says, we can't have you here anymore. And there is, I think, one in the Midwest where one of their firefighters, made some comment towards somebody in the community, the fire chief or the police chief or something like that, and he got terminated for violating their social media policy. But the community is relatively small, and this is the first time I've ever seen this. And the department got on their social media site and said that they apologized for this firefighter's conduct, that didn't reflect their core values, and they terminated him, and they apologized for offending anyone in the community, which I've never seen a fire department do that before so publicly. So I think we're getting wiser on our the use of social media, which for many people can be a career ender or be terminated from your volunteer department.
One thing you mentioned to me once, or not to me, but in the class I was in, if I'm correct in what I remember, I wrote down this one of your quotes from your class back when I was in it back in June. Anyway, I think you said oftentimes it's our own people who sue us. Then, and you did hit on that just a few minutes ago, right? It's not often Mr. or Mrs. Smith suing us. It's our own people due to that first half of what you talked about with discrimination or bullying and things like that. So those are two huge topics that help get our ship in order. But I do want to go back to the social media real quick since you brought up that good point. So what are some must-have things we need to have done to get our social media, if the policy in effect? What are some of the must-have things we have to do to cover our butt with social media? Because obviously everyone has Facebook, everyone has a computer, and we're volunteers. And do we make it part of our initial orientation with new members that, hey, you can't post anything about XYZ fire department that you are now a member of unless it's approved by somebody? I mean, what's a good way to handle that, to get a grip on it?
That's an excellent question. I think the first thing it starts out with is having a good policy. And so the policy would describe, sort of what's permissible speech on your personal social media site. So you have to remember that even if you're a member of an organization, be it volunteer or career, you still have the right of free speech, which is a First Amendment protection. And so what would happen is that somebody would violate either a policy or a code of conduct, code of ethics, or their social media policy, which gets them into a jam. And many times, because people are so affiliated with their fire department, they have pictures. They say, I'm a firefighter. They have themselves a picture in a bunker, bunker clothing, and those sorts of things. And so when they make these sort of comments that make people's eyebrows raise up, or they make some sort of political statement, or they trash talk somebody who's in their own organization on Facebook, they're automatically linked to their affiliation with the fire department. So interestingly enough, if you're a part of a private fire service, and there's a number of 501c3 fire organizations across the United States, you're a member of a private organization. So the private organization can say, you don't have a right of free speech. You can't say anything about the fire department on your social media, and if you do, you're going to be terminated. If you work for a municipality or a small village, which is government, and you're working for the government, government can limit what you can say under the First Amendment right for free speech, and so they can limit your activity on your Facebook, what the content can entail and that sort of stuff. And so the best thing to do is to have a solid policy about social media. And one of my responsibilities to fire engineering is I manage a policy bank on their fire engineering website. So if anybody is looking for a social media policy, there's a good example in there that you're more than welcome to take and implement it in your organization. It pretty much covers the major areas of what constitutes good conduct, which constitutes bad conduct, which should not put pictures on there, or if you're fortunate enough to run with mobile data terminals on your apparatus, don't take pictures of the address and the people's names and identifiers that everybody in your community knows about. So they don't need to know you're going to Mrs. Jones' house because she fell down the stairs or has some sort of a medical crisis or those sorts of things. So the policy incorporates leaving pictures off, and think before you may write it out, but before you hit send, you want to think about what you're saying first of all, what the impact on the community is second of all, and what the impact is on you.
John,
finally, because you may not be part of that.
Yes. What constitutes? Because it brings up a good question. Is we all, with our Facebook pages or our department websites, we can be very proud of if we had the big fire a couple nights ago and we want to advertise that, hey, my department responded to a fire. We did a good job, put the fire out, and caused this much damage. Is that permissible? Because in a lot of cases they're putting the address of the incident. They may have photos of the firefighters fighting the fire. One of those photos may even show the address, or if it's a small town, people know whose house it is. Do we have to be careful with that? Where do you draw the line between public knowledge, like what's broadcast on the news, versus what's put on our own sites? Right.
Well, I think that's an excellent point, because I see a lot of fire chiefs and other firefighters putting their calls on their Facebook, and most of the time that's okay. I think when you get into a jam is when you engage in some sort of political dialogue. You don't happen to like the presidential candidate, as an example, or you don't happen to like Black Lives Matter as an example, and so you're going to do harm, to those people or that political entity or that sort of stuff. And the other thing is that people do have the right to privacy. So if you're going to post stuff on your Facebook, you want to kind of leave the name and the address off, because as you said, rightfully so, Tom, that the public has the right to know. They're going to get it out of the news media anyway. But what you'll see in the news media is they will generally not put the name of the person who was affected by the emergency nor their address. But if you live in a small town, everybody's going to know about it anyway. So, it only becomes harmful if somebody complains about it. So we want to kind of, just think about what you're putting out there before you put it out there. And I think you'll be on fairly safe ground.
Is there a difference between the fire department or fire company's page and a personal page of a volunteer firefighter when it comes to that? Or is there more leniency given to the department's page as opposed to a volunteer member's page?
Well, good question. Only because I think the fire department's Facebook page is probably highly controlled by the department. So they monitor and screen content, that goes in there. Firefighters' content is pretty much, ad lib. So it's whatever people say or do is pretty much up to their own discretion. There's a number of cases out across the country where, EMTs or firefighters put, response material on there that's inappropriate. They take pictures of people trapped in their cars. They'll take a picture of somebody having a cardiac arrest or a drowning in a pool and post it on their Facebook page. And that may violate a policy, and sometimes it just violates, a moral code that, if I was the parent of the child that was undergoing CPR or the pool drowning, I don't want my kid, all over the nation. So that's where the complaints come in. Or if you have a personal bias against a particular person or that sort of stuff, that's where I think a lot of our volunteers and career people get into a jam, is they're inappropriate in their activities, and they affiliate that sort of behavior with their association with the fire department.
Right. So you said, for people's reference point, if people would like more information on good guidelines for some policy when it comes to social media, that's available right on Fire Engineering's website?
Yeah, it's called the Legal Policy Bank, and there's probably 50 or 60 policies in there dealing with different aspects of fire department operations. You can Google social media policies, and there's a ton of them out there. A lot of them are from corporate. There's a few of them that fire departments will put up on their website that you can, borrow or take, stuff that's applicable to your organization. Sometimes the corporate social media policies are 4 or 5 pages long. I think we're in an industry that 1 or 2 pages of a policy is probably enough. And so if you can keep your policies, especially for social media, to 1 or 2 pages, I think you're going to get better compliance than a 10-page, corporate level social media policy. So I think the one in the policy bank is about a 2-page policy.
And just to reinforce the point, and I know you touched on it briefly, but let's reinforce it out there, that I think there's a lot of people that think because they're volunteer firefighters, they have nothing to lose by posting what they feel they want to post, and that's absolutely not the case. There are ramifications even if you're volunteer, correct?
Exactly. And most of the ramifications is you're going to get let go, terminated from your position as a firefighter in your volunteer organization, because you're in a small community more often than not, and so everybody knows who you are, and so that is certainly could be a personal embarrassment to you that you got let go. And in small communities, and I know because I grew up in one, everybody knows your business after 2 or 3 days, so it's not going to be a secret, closely held.
Yeah, and John, a question that came up once at one of my classes was regarding social media. Is a company's policy was you will not discuss company business on your personal Facebook page or discussed this company in a disparaging way. And the election didn't go well one night for somebody, and they got on their page and said some nasty things about their hometown department. Is that protected by First Amendment rights, or did they violate a good policy that the policy has some teeth in it that the department can take some action and discipline that member?
I'll give you the lawyer answer. It depends. So a lot of it, and again, it depends on how well written your policy is. Because if you're, say you're up for an election and you lost the election, and so do you remain a member of the department or not? And so if you remain a member of the department in sort of a lesser category, and you trash talk your department, certainly the department can evoke their social media policy, and you're out of there. Sometimes if
so your social media policy can say don't discuss
don't disparage
the
the organization.
way.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay,
yeah,
I got
exactly. Yeah. So, and the other thing is, if you have policies like codes of conduct, codes of ethics, and you may not have a social media policy. So there's a recent event that happened in Columbus, South Carolina or North Carolina, where a firefighter put on his social media that there was the Black Lives Matter group was blocking the freeway in his city, and he said they better be off the freeway by the time I get home, or somebody's going to get hurt or die. Mm-hmm. And so he violated their policy. He got terminated, and then two other firefighters in the same department, basically sympathized with him, clicked like on their Facebook page, and added some additional content. They got fired as well. And then the fourth firefighter was, basically because of the tension that was going on in their community, brought a gun to work, and because he feared for his safety, and he violated the no weapons policy, so he got fired too. And
wow,
so
what a
it was
snowball effect. Oof.
Yeah, it was a snowball effect, and this was in a career organization. So there's 4 firefighters that don't have jobs anymore because some guy was pretty angry, made some comment, identified himself as a firefighter, and so these guys all got terminated. So, but the department, if they don't have a social media policy but may have a code of conduct or code of ethics, if you decide to terminate that person, and I don't recommend that may be the first course of action, but maybe some sort of discipline, but you can do, a termination based on the term called conduct unbecoming, where, you embarrass the fire department, you disparage the fire department. We don't have a social media policy, but we have these other policies in place. Because when I usually lecture, I say there's no way to write a policy for everything a firefighter would do. And so, because
although some people do try it,
they
have thousands and thousands of pages.
Yeah, and they're probably only written for one person, mostly. But I think if you had an ethical policy and a code of conduct policy, that pretty much covers everything you didn't have in a policy. And so you can utilize those policies to either do some discipline or some corrective behavior actions. Because I'm always of the ilk that you don't want to fire people right out of the chute. Because we spend a lot of time and money training our volunteers, and they're a community asset. And if you only have a handful of volunteers, firing 1 or 2 of them is just going to harm the community. And so try to do everything you can in your department to salvage. Say, look, this is not conduct that we believe that you should be engaging in, and the next time you do this, we're going to, suspend you for a period of time, or if it's highly egregious, we're going to, let you go because you're not reflecting the image that we want reflected in our community. So
right.
It's for the fire chief, and fire administration, it's a tough decision I think they need to make, but they need to have policies in place that helps make their job a lot easier, and that the firefighters know what the policies are. Yeah.
Wow, that definitely is an area that needs to be addressed, and one thing that maybe incoming boards in 2017 can take a look at and make sure their house is in order when it comes to social media and ethics policies and things like that. And if nothing else, feel free to consult Fire Engineering's website for some information that can help in developing your policy or revising it. And speaking of fire engineering, I'd be remiss if I didn't remind everybody that they're listening to Fire Engineering Blog Talk Radio, tonight's installment of the Professional Volunteer Fire Department, and it is sponsored by Honeywell and DuPont Kevlar, and we want to thank them because this year they sponsored 20 full scholarship rides for FDIC 2017, and that is fantastic. That's 20 people who would not have had the chance to attend FDIC are getting a full ride, everything, travel, accommodations, food, and we want to thank Honeywell, we want to thank and DuPont Kevlar, we want to thank them so much for sponsoring those scholarships and, again, continuing to sponsor these blog talk radio shows. We're indebted to them. And I'm indebted to my guest tonight. Again, we're talking with John Murphy. He's a contributor, an author, a blogger for fire engineering, attorney at law, and we're talking about preventing legal fires in our volunteer firehouses. And if anyone has any questions for John, feel free. Please call in. The number again is 760-454-8852. And, John, I do want to tackle another issue that comes up from time to time and questions that come up in my class from time to time, and I obviously am no means an attorney and can't really give answers, but hopefully point people in the right direction. But let's talk about the new member in the process for bringing new members in, and do our volunteer departments have the legal right to vote new members in? Because I think most of us do it, and some have a probationary period where then after 6 months or after a year, they vote again on that member to decide if they're going to keep them. And I know there's been some issues over the years with different ways of doing these procedures. And is there a recommended pathway for a new member, or is it up to the department just to put it in their bylaws how they're going to do it?
Right. I think that, the voting in a new member has been sort of that traditional and historic way to get volunteers in many parts of our country. Other parts of our country go through a more formal hiring process on volunteers, and so they have to fill out an application and they, take some written exams, a physical abilities test to get a medical physical. Some give a psychological exam, and then they go through their probationary period. And their probationary period is pretty much all done under supervision and, training accomplishments and those sorts of things. So it's a sort of a more formal process. So at the end of the 1-year probationary period, or however long it is, they just take a look at their performance and skill attainment, and they're either in or they're out. I think the voting in component, if it's done properly, and I did a case on the East Coast where a member was voted in without any sort of background check and ended up committing arson in their community, burned down 3 houses. At the risk of people that were the occupants and actually some of the firefighters. And so what they found out was that because of this young man's affiliation with former members of the department, they just voted him in, carte blanche without a lot of background checks on him, and found out that, when they actually did a background check after he was put into prison for his arson activity, found out he had domestic violence and drug issues and lots of different things that would not make him a good candidate. So I think the voting in part is that sort of tradition that, I like. I think it adds some depth to a community that there's especially in the older departments, that there's history and a historical perspective of getting people in. But I also think that, you ought to step up the background check component of it, and do some couple simple things that would ensure that the people that you're voting in don't have a criminal background, don't have a drug background, aren't drug dealers, or all of that sort of the bad behavior that we see in too many young people. Not everybody, but there's a certain number of people that are getting into trouble, and it reassures the commissioners of the board that they're getting a pretty fairly qualified candidate. And then as time goes on, they go to an academy, they're supervised by people that have the experience to supervise. At the end of probationary period, the voting in component, again, I think that if you're going to let somebody go through that process, you better have a good reason, because there's a couple of incidents where, there were successfully qualified candidates who came into the program were voted out after the program. And when the litigation ensued for this sort of, you discriminated against me because I'm a woman or I'm a person of color or you didn't like my religion or my political beliefs, or that's not a protected entity, but because of some sort of bias that may have occurred at any level through the department, these people were not allowed to continue. It all fell back on, if you're going to do a voting in, it has to be for the right reason, and I think it's a formal process at the end of a successful probationary period. Go ahead.
I was just going to ask, once they're a member, so say somebody off the street, you comes in, you do the background check, comes before the department votes them in, or the Board of Commissioners accepts them, however it's done.
Right.
Once they're accepted, are they due process if they're going to be dismissed?
Not necessarily.
Okay.
And just for the record, due process is a sort of process about administering some sort of, like if you're doing a discipline process. People are afforded the right under the Fourth Amendment and the 14th Amendment to have a process that's been pretty much outlined in your policy on how the discipline is going to occur. So you have the right of representation, you have the right to appeal, you have all of these sort of rights under a due process. But a lot of volunteers are considered at-will employees unless you have a contract or you're getting some sort of a remuneration or getting paid in some form or fashion, or part of a retirement system that may make you an employee. And a lot of organizations may not recognize that fact. When I was teaching yesterday, there's a number of volunteers, and we're in Texas, and Texas has a lot of volunteer fire departments and firefighters, and so that question came up. Are our volunteers employees? And I said, well, do you pay them? And they go, no. I said, are they part of a retirement program? And they go, well, yeah, the department pays into some sort of Texas firefighter retirement pension system for volunteers. I said, well, they may be characterized as employees because they're getting this sort of benefit from the employment. So, you need to have your local attorney kind of cipher that out. But in general, most volunteers are at-will employees. And so, they can be terminated for pretty much any reason as long as it's not for discrimination or a discriminatory reason. And so I think if you're going to let somebody go who's a member, it's got to be done for the right reason and not because of these biases or these sort of discriminatory activities, towards these employees. Now, being that I said that, most organizations will have some sort of bylaws or operating policies or those sorts of things on how they deal with their employees. And we're finding that courts are very reluctant to interfere in department managerial decisions, especially in volunteer departments, because as long as you have a good set of policies or bylaws that talks about employment and employees, and these people are not employees, they're volunteers, they're not compensated, they're not part of the pension system. Like I said earlier, they're at-will employees, and so you can let them go for pretty much any reason. But in your bylaws, I think it needs to be clearly spelled out on how that process works.
Interesting. So if somebody's voted into a department and for 6 months or a year they're considered probationary members, I know there are departments out there that at any point during that probationary period they can be brought up for a vote, and majority of members voting can decide, he's not working out, he or she's not working out, we're going to let them go. If that's pretty well clearly spelled out in your bylaws as the way business is conducted, and as long as they're not violating some of the important laws such as discrimination, then most likely that is okay then, correct?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
So because I think the other part of bringing a person in from the community to be a volunteer is compatibility with the community and the organization. Because some people don't fit. I mean, they may come in with the best intentions, but when you actually get to their true colors, people are going, this person is not fitting in with our organization. They may have, weird habits. They may, there's tons of things that may go on that make people think, well, we could bring him on, pass the probation, vote him in, and then, he's going to be a pain in our backsides for the next 20 years. Let's stop it now. And then, we just move our separate ways, and the organization, I think, will be better off to make that tough decision.
Right.
Even if they're a good performer. I mean, sometimes, people's personalities is 180 degrees on how their skill performance. So good firefighter, good EMT or first responder, but horrible personality. He's cranky, he's a bully, plays consistent practical jokes on people. People hate him or her. There's not a good fit. So that person needs to go away. And I think that's the board's responsibility to ensure for the greater good of the organization, the people in the community, that, this person gets voted out.
And if that person voted out decides to seek legal advice or take it to the next level, as long as the department members show that they were not involved in any discriminatory practice, that they very clearly identify the reasons. Maybe the person wasn't performing. Maybe they didn't get their minimum training in or make the minimum number of calls. Or, as you said, someone just felt they weren't a good fit. As long as they're not saying, well, I did it because I didn't like his religion or because it was a female, that probably would be upheld then, correct?
Yeah, I would believe that. I think it's it's a high bar for an attorney to take a employment law case for a volunteer, because a lot of times the volunteers don't really have any standing to file a lawsuit because they're not employees, and that if you don't file a federal claim, then and get what's called a right to sue letter because you've been discriminated against. It's very difficult for to find an attorney that's going to represent a volunteer member in an organization. Now, saying that, there has been a couple of cases where an attorney, it's funny, an attorney was a volunteer in a organization. It had more of a formal setting for their volunteers. She was harassed by her fire chief, and not only in private but in public, in a public meeting, and so they basically terminated her for no good reason as a result of some miscommunication, and she was basically chastised in front of an open public meeting and then in an executive session, and then they terminated her. So she filed a lawsuit, and this was in Maryland, for wrongful termination. And so they ended up settling and never went to court. But, she had what most people don't have is that she was an attorney, and she was an employment law attorney especially. And so, we're thinking what the heck's the fire chief thinking that you don't terminate an employment law attorney but they thought they were on safe ground because it's a volunteer organization. But what they didn't realize is the construct of the organization had more benefits to their members. Almost had them compensated for calls. They're classified as employees of the organization, so their construct of the organization was different than just a purely volunteer organization in the majority of our country.
Now, I just want to clarify the employee part, because I know in a lot of areas of the country, especially for sure I know in my area, over the last 20 years now or more, there is a pretty good retirement program, defined benefit program,
right.
for the volunteers. They reach a certain age and they can start collecting a monthly payment. So I would imagine, based on what you're saying, that kind of classifies them as employees. So that does change things a little bit.
Well, I'll give you the depends lawyer answer.
Yeah.
Because you have a LOSAP. That's the LOSAP program you're talking about.
Yes. Correct. Yes.
And so I'm really, to be honest with you, I'm not sure whether that constitutes an employee-employer relationship.
Mm-hmm.
I do know that in my state, in Washington State, volunteers get minimal wage compensation. There's no contract for them to be hired on. They're not represented by any sort of labor group, but they do have a pension system as well. And so, for all intents and purposes, when we're dealing with our volunteers in Washington State, they are considered employees, and so they have all the rights and privileges of an employee in an organization. So if you're going to terminate them or discipline them, they're afforded, certain rights of representation and, progressive discipline and due process and all that sort of stuff because of their standing. In New York, I'm really not sure, and so I think that clarifying that with your local attorney would be smart,
right?
Because again, if you're under the that LOSAP program, you get a benefit at the end of your service with the fire department as a volunteer. You may very well be classified as an employee enjoying all those rights.
Yeah, it might be, again, one other thing to add to the list to check on this year to get the ship in order and see where you stand. But and then back to another question I have is back when you talked about background checks. In my area, we're pretty good with doing the arson, and they've now expanded it to, I believe, sexual assault and things like that. I know with arson, it's an immediate disqualification. They cannot serve as a volunteer member. And if they have a sexual assault or, I believe, sexual predator history, that can be used to disqualify them. It's not an automatic. So some companies get worried that, well, he was arrested, but it was 10 years ago. It was a felony. Or the question always comes up is, when can you use that to kind of disqualify someone from being a member? People are so worried about being sued today that they may reluctantly accept a member who then gives them trouble down the road, and they say you should have known better, but they were afraid. So, but can it be used? Can the company decide, no, based on your background, if it's not arson or even if it's not a felony, can they still take some of these previous offenses and say, nope, we're not going to accept you? Or could they find themselves in hot water if that person decided to sue?
Well, and that's an excellent question, because there's been a couple of cases coming up that haven't gone to court yet, but there's been litigation filed against an organization. So the question is, the employer, which is the volunteer department, does not have to employ everybody who applies, and that's one of the rights of being an employer or being a volunteer fire department, is you don't have to take everybody that knocks on your door, and you don't actually have to give them a reason why you didn't accept their application, even after you did a background check. So if you get an application, they put on there that they may have committed a felony. It depends on how your application is constructed, but sometimes they'll put at the bottom, have you had any criminal convictions, and if so, what are they? Some people will not say anything, and hoping that the department does not do a background check. So if you're conscientious in doing background checks, and they did have a misdemeanor or a felony, or they spent time in prison, or they were convicted of child pornography or assault and those sorts of things, they essentially lied on their application, and so you wouldn't take them anyway because they're being dishonest. If they said that, yes, I had a felony, a DUI, and somebody was in a motor vehicle accident and they died, and it was 20 years ago, I served my time, I paid my penalties and dues, then I think you're probably, somebody's going to be on the decision tree saying, well, he hasn't had any problems for the last 15 years. He's been a model citizen in our community. Let's take a chance. Let's take a chance on this guy. So most of the time that works out pretty good. I think with, and the psychologist will kind of back me up on this, if you have a sexual predator, pedophile, and most police organizations will have a operating website for child molesters and those sorts of things in your neighborhood, so people know, because it's all part of the public record. There's a high level of repeat behavior on predators, child predators, and so you wouldn't want those individuals in your organization, because you have a lot of young people in there. You got, depending on your organization, like for you guys, you may have a 15 or 16-year-old person in there as in your junior firefighting group. Other organizations may bring, kids in on explorer programs, 14, 15, and 16. And so it's like a target-rich environment for these, predatory, individuals in your organization. You don't want them in there. And so the recommendation is to not have those people be a part of your organization. One of the things we found is that a lot of background checks are incomplete, because you may go to the local drivers through your local police department or state patrol or whatever, and they'll do a driver's license check. But this guy, and that's just for your state. And so what you need is some organization that can do a national search for where does this guy come from? Where does this woman come from? And on their application, they probably should list, where they lived, where they work, how many residences they have, are they been in the community for, their entire 15 years or 20 years, or if you have an older volunteer, were they in the military? So you want to get all of that sort of information for your volunteers to come in. But I think
legal.
It's a risk.
You can ask them that legally, where they've lived and what communities they have.
So after you accept their application, you could do a background check on them. So sometimes they'll put on the application that, this may or may not affect your ability to be a member of our organization or be hired by our organization. There's some controversy that people may not tell the truth, and then you discover that they did have a felony, and so, like I said before, they lied on the application, and so you don't want them in. And so some groups will say, don't ask anything about criminal record until you bring them into the organization, accept them. You kind of give an opportunity to become a member, and then you could do a complete background check on them. So you kind of formalize the front part of this, accept that their application, maybe you had done a small interview with them, and then you say, look, we're going to do a background check on you.
So let me just stop you right there. Accepting
okay?
their application doesn't accept them as a member yet. You're just accepting the application.
No. Right. You're just accepting the application.
Okay. Gotcha.
So
then
departments,
you can go to the next step.
Yeah.
Okay.
So you need to go through the application process before you get to the point where you're going to do some background checks or have an interview with them based on, this is what you said in your application. Can you tell me more? You want to do that sort of stuff. And then I think everybody who comes into the organization, you need to do a background check on them.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Now,
so
you mentioned something interesting.
And again, there's that hiring process in a step-by-step manner.
You mentioned something interesting too about you don't necessarily owe them an explanation if the application gets rejected. Now, I'm feeling comfortable rejecting an application if they've done something really bad, such as what you covered, felony of some type in the recent past, arson, obviously, sexual predator, of course. But what if there's a board that's responsible for interviewing the prospective applicant, and the board just didn't get a good feeling about him, or you got somebody on the board that says, hey, my neighbor's friend, sister's brother's sister knows him or her, and they said, not a good mix, and the board rejects the application. Now, they're not owed an explanation as to why it got rejected, but could this person take further action?
No.
I guess it's always an option.
Because they're not a member of the organization. They have no standing. So unless they have they're in a protected class, they're, a person of color or a woman or maybe somebody over the 40, over 40, they may have, actionable action against an organization. But, again, like I said earlier, we're not obligated to hire everybody that knocks on our door and provides an application. And they're certainly not, they're not due, or they may not be eligible to be afforded an opportunity to say, hey, this is the reason we didn't hire you, or we don't want you a member organization. A lot of organizations don't want to do that. I mean, they just don't want to put themselves out there in harm's way, because all that does is just create more fodder for this person to say, well, I'm going to sue you because you don't like the way I look, you don't like the way I comb my hair. So I usually tell my clients just to, if you're going to reject it, just say your application's been rejected. And you don't have to give them any excuse for why that occurs.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, you mentioned there are protected classes, however, so if an application is rejected and the party is one of those protected classes, you better have probably a really good reason in case it goes to that next step.
So you better have a good reason, and the reason can't be because they're a woman or they're African American or Asian or any of the people that are included. Because everybody has the right to protect. Our civil rights laws are fairly broad, so they protect everybody. And I think employers have a little bit higher bar to make sure that they don't discriminate against new applicants, even in the volunteer side.
Yeah. Yeah, this does get into this does come up quite a bit, because that boardroom discussion where somebody just doesn't like somebody every now and then comes up in volunteer companies, and there's always the threat to sue. But applications can be rejected unless, like we said, it's a person in the protected class, or but they can be rejected. We don't have to take everybody that applies.
No, and what goes on in the boardroom is not, because mostly it's an executive session anyway, and that's not disclosable. So the board can make the decision, and then they put up a list. We're going to bring these people on, and there may be 2 or 3 people that fall by the wayside. So, and they may come back and ask you, how come you didn't hire me? And you don't have to say anything. You say, well, this was the board decision. Based on all available information, we just decided to hire these people.
Right. Interesting. And again, I'd like to remind our listeners that this is Fire Engineering Talk Radio, and I'm so thrilled to have John Murphy on with us tonight talking about preventing legal issues in the fire service. There's still time if anyone would like to call in, has any legal questions for John, or looking for some advice. Please, the number 760-454-8852. And another area I wanted to cover, John, there's a lot of different areas we could talk about, and I appreciate your time. But the subject, you mentioned it at the very beginning of the show, on harassment and bullying. This has scared people, rightly so. There's been some horrific examples of fire service bullying, bordering on just insane. However, I think one of the time-honored traditions in the fire service, not just the volunteer service, but the fire service in general, is probationary chores and probationary expectations. And I don't think it's illegal to expect maybe it's a department rule that probationary members have to take the garbage out every Wednesday night for their first year, or have to help in the kitchen. It's still okay to have probie chores, correct?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely, yes. So, probie chores, that's, one of the things we talk about is that sort of rite of passage into an organization. And certainly probationary chores are a big part of that activity. So they wash the rigs. They scrub the floors. They clean the toilets. They, take out the garbage. They, do all of those sort of things that, you did when you went into your organization. And so I think when it becomes, sort of actionable is that when there's what they describe as, some sort of prejudice or personal malice, or an attempt to quit, make people quit because they're being singled out or focused on by certain members of the organization. And then that gets into this sort of harassment that becomes harmful to the individual and harmful to the organization. That and people can't recognize it for what it is most of the time, only because they went through the same thing. So it's like, well, I did it.
Right.
Now you're going to do it.
Right.
And so, and harassment is one of those subsections of the Civil Rights Act where they talk about, harassment and, lots of different forms that it's, and that, basically the definition is it's a course of conduct directed at a specific person that causes substantial emotional distress and serving no legitimate purpose. And so if that's what the intent is, and usually what happens, it will drive the person out of the organization because they don't want to deal with that stuff anymore. And so you may see this, and we're finding it kind of interesting that there's a lot of veterans that are coming back, participating as firefighters.
Yeah, untapped resource there in a lot of the communities. Hey, John, if I could, I just want to ask you to hold that thought. We actually have a caller that's been holding for a couple minutes now, and I'd hate to keep him holding too long. So we'll get back to your veteran statement. Is that okay with you? We'll bring this caller on and see if they have a question for you. All right, let's see. It's from the 270 area code. And hello, this is Tom Merrill. Welcome to the Professional Volunteer Fire Department. Who do we have here tonight?
Hey, Tom, this is Scott Lawson with Bardstown, Kentucky. I guess I almost have like a two-part question, and I can only speak on behalf of Kentucky. Across the nation right now is recruitment retention, and I'm starting to see a lot of volunteer departments in Kentucky struggling with the staffing issue, and when they go make a fire and then they come back and leave and don't leave no one there to do like fire watch and a rekindle comes back. How can we get a better or give out, I guess not education, but give knowledge to the departments, and correct me on this, John, that the fire department is responsible for that rekindle and could be possibly liable for rebuilding that home. Am I correct on that?
And what was your name? I'm sorry, what was your first name?
My name is Scott.
Oh, Scott, okay. Great
yes,
question, Scott. I'd like to hear what you have to say on that, John. Is the fire department responsible if there's a rekindle? Are they rebuilding that house?
Well, it's going to be a fire of convenience to get a new house. But I think the rekindle issue is an interesting issue because the general thought about fire departments is that we have no specific obligation to any one person in your community. So we have it's entitled the Public Duty Doctrine, where you do not have a contract or an arrangement with a single person in your or in your community to provide any sort of fire protection or any sort of EMS sort of activity. So, but you do have a general obligation. And so when you do have a fire, you don't have sufficient staffing to do a fire watch, which, I always think is a good idea, but if you can't bring enough people on board to make that happen, you leave the scene and the fire starts up again. There really has not been any sort of case law that would say the fire department is responsible for a rekindle or a second fire, at this original address because of the Public Duty Doctrine, where you don't owe any one person in your community an obligation to respond or prevent any sort of rekindles. So I think you're on pretty safe ground if there is, if you don't have sufficient staffing. You just have to do what you do, but there's really been no demonstrated liability on the fire department if there has been a rekindle.
I appreciate your question. Appreciate your answer.
And Scott, did you say you had a second part to that question, or was that everything?
Well, it was like a two-part question. Talking about staffing, being short. Even if the department is getting a stipend pay, is there obligation? I guess what I'm trying to get at, where it's so tough to get volunteers, the recruitment tension, even though the city government is providing like a stipend pay, is it still the responsibility of the city, even though they're not providing full-time staffing to man that department?
Mm-hmm. Well, again, it goes back to the municipal obligation. Actually,
right.
Cities and municipalities don't have to have a fire department, but I think they do to protect, the community from fire and that sort of stuff. The staffing issue has been, a horribly discussed issue across the country. We all know that there's not enough firefighters, and so usually due to budget constraints, most fire departments, and if not all fire departments, run short-staffed, and we're always in a quest to get more firefighters on. But the reality is, you don't have to have, under the NFPA standard, as an example, the minimum staffing on apparatus. It's a lot of communities don't adopt the NFPA, and so a lot of communities will do the best they can, which is a defense in some instances. We did the best we could with what the resources that we had, and there's a general immunity, to governmental entities anyway, that prevent any sort of successful litigation, even though everybody articulates, hey, we need more people, or we are not fully staffed to go on fires. Again, municipalities are not on the hook to, provide, full staffing on all the apparatus, which irritates every firefighter I know.
Yep, and I'm sure, Scott, sure your department's like mine and all the others out there, where when you do have an emergency incident, especially a fire, and you're done, you're back at quarters, you get the rigs washed off, and maybe your SCBA's put back in service, and people are looking at their watch thinking, I got to go, or they're at the scene even saying, can we hurry up? I got to get to work, or I got to pick my kids up, or there's a lot of things competing for our time, and yeah, it's definitely, you're red-faced and embarrassed if you're called back for that rekindle, but excellent question about where the liability falls there. And did he answer your question okay, Scott?
Oh, he definitely did, Tom. Like I said, I can only speak for my area. In my county we got 5 departments, and during the daytime, they can't even get a fire truck out because they're working outside their little community, so...
Right. That's
I appreciate the questions, and thank y'all for what y'all do.
Hey, thank you for calling
Scott. I appreciate
in.
You calling in.
Really appreciate it, brother. Stay safe out there, okay? And thanks for calling in.
All right. Thank y'all.
Take care, Scott. That was a really good question he had there.
That was an excellent question.
Yeah. But I know I cut you off there. We were talking. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Oh, I was just going to say there's a good litigation rekindle case in Seattle where the firefighters went to a person's residence. They put the fire out. They did overhaul. They left. The firefighters gave the owner brochures about how to make sure you call your insurance company. You can call a company that will come in and help do the overhaul and clean up and get rid of the smoke. And then, several hours later, the house started on fire again. And so she filed a lawsuit against the department because what she felt was now the department owed her special obligation to prevent that fire. And so the court ruled, no, under the public duty doctrine, there's no obligation. There's a general obligation to the community, but there's no obligation to you as an individual. And so, that was a pretty good case dealing with just what Scott talked about. Yeah.
You're doing the very best you possibly can, and
that's
sometimes
that's perfectly legitimate defense. Yeah. We're talking about veterans.
Yeah, the veterans with the. Yep, go ahead.
Yeah, so untapped resource in your community. Veterans returning. The thing I like about veterans is that they already have discipline. They understand how to take an order. And they're usually pretty good members of not only the community, but could be a good member of your organization. They're not going to tolerate being harassed. And I'll tell you that, being a former military, you're in boot camp, you're harassed, for the 8 or 10 weeks that you're there. I mean, what harassment is. And after you get out of the boot camp, You just don't have to deal with that sort of stuff. So if you start doing this sort of, harassing behavior on a probationary person who's a veteran, they're going to say, been there, done that, I'm leaving. Because I thought the organization was more organized or more mature, and so we really don't need to have to deal with this sort of stuff. And so I think that, and I always say, do we harass our firefighters? And the answer is, nobody answers it because they don't want to admit to it, but we do. And we do, we don't call it harassment, we call it their probationary period. And so they do, chores and tasks that, nobody else in the department does, but they've all done it.
And those chores and those expectations can be placed upon our probationary members in a respectful way. We don't have to belittle them and make fun of them and almost be mean and demanding. It can be done. Hey, new members, this is expected. Let's get these chores done. Let's, hey, new member, take the garbage out. You don't have to be nasty per se. So
no, you don't.
Again, that gets back to what I talked about earlier with leadership.
Yeah, exactly. There's a good case down in Florida where they had a probationary volunteer. There's a woman who they had 24-hour assignments, and so she was in her bunk. And part of their hazing or harassing or hazing deal was they put a hood over. They put a pillowcase over her and duct taped her to the bed, and then took the bed out onto the apparatus bay on the apron outside. And they wouldn't let her go. And so her claim was assault. And so she filed a lawsuit against the department for an assault charge. It was a criminal charge, and the department had to answer to it. And so they ended up settling, for not a lot of money, but she, basically quit. And so I think that when, you get these sort of hazing or harassing activities that go on that are beyond the pale, that make, that people say, well, we shouldn't be doing this, or why are we doing this? Then the issue is you shouldn't be doing it. And somebody in a leadership role needs to say, we need to stop this behavior now. And even if the person, who's the sort of the target, says, this is way beyond the pale, you need to stop it. The organization needs to take notice of that, and they need to stop that sort of particular behavior.
Yeah, good advice. Yeah, for sure. If someone says, hey, I'm not comfortable with this, or you're crossing the line, that might be a red flag. We're not talking taking the garbage out here or cleaning pots and pans or washing rigs. Obviously something else is going on there to cause this person some concern. So, again, just one of the other legal fires that we can extinguish by taking a step back as we enter 2017 to look over how we're doing things and conducting business in our hometown volunteer fire department. And John, we've been talking for just about an hour and a half now, and I actually have a lot more questions we could ask, but I know when people are sitting and listening to our show, and even you on the road, an hour and a half to 2 hours is when people start getting a little antsy. So I'm going to start wrapping it up here. But, with things we haven't covered, maybe down the road I could get you back on the show again, because certainly we've covered some good topics here tonight, but I'm sure there's a lot more we could talk about.
Oh, yeah. We could do phase 2. Maybe absolutely. In a couple of months when you have your other guests come out, because there is a lot to talk about. I think in general, and I know that you probably want to wrap this up, but I think in general...
Oh, take your time. I've got all night. You stay as long as you want.
I think in general, volunteer departments have very little... They have a lot of risk exposure for lots of different reasons. So, sometimes the commissioners won't go to bid on a piece of apparatus, or they're going to build a building, and they're using public money to do that sort of stuff, and the state auditor comes in and audits their books, and they found they didn't have the proper bidding process, or they purchased or sold property without proper notice. I mean, there's a ton of, these sort of litigation issues that go on, or legal issues that go on in departments that really never rise to a lawsuit, but they create a lot of stress on, especially volunteer organizations, because you don't have a lot of resources. So I think that, commissioners or board members or, whatever your organizational structure is, you have to be familiar with, state law and the state rules. I think having a good policy manual that's up to date is invaluable. Current set of bylaws in your organization, it gets refreshed, is an invaluable aid to decision making. And then, those sort of documents that establish the framework of the organization need to be publicly or distributed amongst the members so they understand what their role is in, keeping the department out of legal jeopardy. Doing some classes, I know that there's a lot of classes for volunteers around the country. Not a lot of them deal with the legal issues or supervisory issues. Most of it's with, skills attainment and structure fires and rescue and all that other stuff. Excuse me. But I think it's important that organizations kind of take a look at, what their administrative responsibilities are. There's a lot of litigation in career departments with personnel issues, people suing other firefighters. We don't see that much in the volunteer organization because most people don't work together 24 hours a day. They come and go. They have their own lives. They got other jobs. And so, their participation in the organization is not subject to so much discrimination litigation. And even like I said earlier, if they burn somebody's house down or the rescue fails or the CPR doesn't work or, those sorts of things, very little litigation that we're seeing across the country dealing with volunteers as opposed to, the career organizations. But it doesn't necessarily mean that, you just can be asleep at the wheel. And so, you need to have all the groundwork laid out and make sure that you do have good policies and procedures and codes of conduct and codes of ethics and that your people understand that, you're there, I think, as a supervisor or an officer to create a safe place for people to be, that they're not subject to undue harassment or a hostile work environment, and that and if there is bad behavior going on, that people recognize it and say, stop it. You need to not proceed in this direction, because it's harassing or it creates an environment where it's not, conducive for good working relationships or, because we depend on a lot of our fellow firefighter for safety purposes out on the fire scene. And so, if you're always nagging at somebody or harassing them, they may not be so quick to come and bail your butt out of a fire to make you suffer a little bit. So there's always that sort of activity. So I do appreciate you being on your show. And I know that an hour and a half is a lot. The lawyers usually do about an hour and 15 minutes, I think, was our longest one. So we do appreciate the audience.
Yeah, let me put a plug in for your show for people that are interested in these topics and want to learn more. I mean, you co-host, it's Fire Service Court, correct?
Yeah, Fire Service Court Radio. Yeah. There's 4 attorneys, myself, Kurt Verone from Rhode Island. He's a retired deputy assistant chief and been an attorney for a long period of time. Brad Pinsky up in Manlius, New York, has a lot of. I'll put it in he's the current fire chief of Manlius. Been a lawyer for a number of years. He's a good resource for the New York audience to go talk to. He has a lot of clients that are in the state of New York, so he'd be an excellent resource for the New York fire departments. And if you have questions about issues like LoSAP and the stuff that we talked about earlier, Chip Comstock is the 4th member. He's from Ohio, just outside of Youngstown. He's a fire chief there as well and has been an attorney for probably 25 years. And so we do these radio shows. Our shows are on Thursday night about every 6 weeks. And we talk about, current legal issues that are affecting the fire service today. And the last show talked about inspection liability in light of the ghost ship fire in Oakland, California. Although there's still a lot of undiscovered evidence that that we don't know about yet. We just talked about inspections and those sorts of things in general terms, but certainly the ghost ship fire was the impetus to put that show on.
Yeah,
so we're
on
Thursday night.
Questions there.
Yeah, and that's. I just did an article I co-wrote with another gentleman talking about inspections. And, there's some immunities for fire departments and cities when it comes to inspection liability. So when that article comes out, we'll be sure to get that out as well.
And if people wanted to get a hold of you specifically, John, if someone listening tonight had a question or was looking for some advice and wanted to get a hold of you, or maybe even bring you in to do a class preventing legal fires or something similar, how can they get a hold of you?
The best way is my email. And so the email is j.k.Murphy, Murphy, @comcast.net. Or you can call my phone, which is 206-940-6502. And I always answer my email. I had a funny question yesterday. One of my students in the class go, "Do you answer your email?" I go, "All the time. I hate it when people don't answer the email." So I'm on email all the time, so I answer those. And so that's j.k.Murphy @comcast.net, and the phone number is 206-940-6502, and I always respond.
Excellent. Well, I can't thank you enough, John, for taking the time out of your busy schedule, again, being on the road and all, and taking the time to be on my show. And there are many more questions that I can ask you next time, so we definitely will put another legal issue show together down the road a little bit. And again, thank you so much. A lot of good information tonight, a lot of steps that boards and commissioners and powers that be can take in the upcoming year to help prevent legal fires in their firehouse. So my thanks to you. I appreciate it.
Well, thank you, Tom, and it's a privilege and honor to be on your show, and I appreciate the opportunity to participate. This is important stuff, and I appreciate you asking.
Excellent. And if not sooner, I will see you at FDIC, my friend.
Yes, and we'll see all of our listening audience out there as well.
Absolutely. Thanks again, John.
All right. Take care, Tom.
You take care. Talk to you soon. Bye-bye now.
Bye-bye.
Well, there you have it, folks. Just, I thought, a great show, a lot of good information. I hope we answered some questions that you might have had. Again, if not, feel free to reach out to him. And again, if you missed his email, you can always obviously play it back. And if not, reach out to me. And again, I am on Facebook. Reach out to my Facebook page. Give it a like, the Professional Volunteer Fire Department. I'm on Twitter. You can contact me via email, tamerrill63 @AOL.com, and Merrill is MERRILL. I love going out on the road and meeting firefighters everywhere. I'll be out on the road 3 times here over the next month, a couple trips into the Long Island and Orange County area of New York, and then I'm going down to Virginia Beach for the Virginia Fire and Rescue Conference. I'll be out at FDIC doing my presentation, and I'd love to bring it to your area. Feel free to reach out to me, because together we can talk about the Professional Volunteer Fire Department and steps we can take both in the organization and outside the organization to make our department a little more professional. And again, I'd like to thank DuPont Kevlar for sponsoring the show tonight, and again, awarding those 20 scholarships to FDIC for 2017. If at all possible, do what you can to get to FDIC 2017. It is just a premier fire training event nationwide, and there's something for everybody there. And again, it's April 24th to April 29th in Indianapolis. And again, thanks to our friends Honeywell and DuPont Kevlar for sponsoring these fire engineering shows, and also for the 20 scholarships they awarded. Speaking of shows, my next show is scheduled for Tuesday, February 28th. And as of now, I have scheduled tentatively Dan Kerrigan and Jim Moss, who are going to be here to talk about the importance of firefighter fitness. And they have a very, very highly effective program that they teach called functional fitness. And, I did talk earlier about one of the goals this year being to make yourself more physically fit. It is one of the paramount requirements for every firefighter, whether you're career or volunteer, and that's to be fit for duty. And their message is that, and they have a program called Functional Fitness. And, It's a method that uses real-life activities and positions to best prepare you for optimal fireground performance. And we have scheduled that for Tuesday, February 28th, our next show. And hopefully they can be here, and we have them scheduled. So hopefully nothing comes up. But either way, we will have a great show for you on February 28th. So until next month, make 2017 a great year. Start now. As I mentioned earlier, pick up a leadership book. Work to be the best firefighter, the best officer, the best leader you can be in your organization. And remember, always maintain a professional attitude in everything that you do. And before I say sign off, I just want to give this tonight's shout-out to a fire department down in Virginia. You know, the trend is, and we talked about it a few times tonight, the trend is we are losing volunteer firefighters faster than we are replacing them. And it's a nationwide obstacle, and it doesn't matter if you're a big department or a small department or what part of the country you come from, where we can all use increased membership in our volunteer fire department. And there are some departments out there, however, that are going against the grain and doing a great job in recruiting, not just recruiting, no, retaining membership. And tonight's shout-out of the month goes to the Swoop Volunteer Fire Company down in the Stanton, Virginia area, who, under the direction of Chief Kevin Wilkes and President Linda Brooks, they have seen their volunteer fire membership increase dramatically, and they've taken some steps to not just increase the membership, but to retain the membership. Now, this is in a rural community outside of Stanton, Virginia, in the Shenandoah Valley foothills, or in the Shenandoah Valley at the foothills of the Blue Ridge Mountain. And they had 14 members in 2005, and as of today, they are approaching 60 members, including 21 female members, which I think is fantastic. One thing I do talk about in my class is the need to diversify our volunteer fire service ranks. There are untapped people out there that can be reached out to become volunteer firefighters, females and minorities for certain. The chief says, Chief Wilkes states, he's got a secret weapon to not just getting members but retaining them, and he treats all of them like they're a member of his family. He goes on to say that he never demands, he always asks, and he always leads by example, and that's what he asks his members to do. They assign mentors to new members that work with these new members during probation to introduce them to what the fire service in their department is all about. They try to ensure that there's fun at the firehouse. Hey, there's a concept. Make being at the firehouse a fun experience. We talked earlier about bullying and harassment. No, make your volunteer firehouse a fun place to be. And you know the best part about their department? They have an acronym, PRIDE. And you know what the P stands for, people? Not people, but you know what the P stands for in their acronym, PRIDE? Professional at times. And they go on. R is respect the team members and the community. The I is innovation for always raising the bar. D is determination for never giving up. And E is everyone goes home. That is awesome. Today's shout out of the month, Swoop Volunteer Fire Company outside of Stanton, Virginia. Congratulations to Chief Wilkes and President Brooks and to the entire membership. Great job. Keep it up. Other departments can learn from your example on what you're doing to increase membership and to keep people, not just attract them, but to keep them. So again, our next show is February 28th. I want to thank you for tuning in tonight and listening in. And remember what we always say, being professional has nothing to do with earning a paycheck. It has everything to do with delivering competent, compassionate service and taking care of your customers, your community, and your own members. And you know what? Developing and maintaining and upholding that professional reputation is the duty of firefighters everywhere, paid or volunteer. Thanks again for listening in tonight. reach out to me on Facebook, give my professional volunteer page a like, and I'd love to hear from you and meet more of you out across this great land of ours. Take care, everybody. We'll talk to you again in about 6 weeks. God bless.